Welcome to the introduction about the epic Greek poem The Odyssey by Homer. Today we're going to be covering some background information about the author, the epic poem itself, the war that led up to it, and a little bit about our main character Odysseus as well as his family. The reason we call the Odyssey an epic poem is because it is one long poem or song that is repeated over and over again throughout generations. In fact, it would not have been written down at the time that Homer put the story together. It would have been shared by people known as bards. Think of them as traveling musicians. This story went all around Greece, which is one of the reasons it holds so much power today. It tells us about different cultures throughout all parts of ancient Greece. Our author, who we give credit for the epic poem The Odyssey, is Homer. He was known to be a blind poet. Most likely, he was just the first person to actually put all of these stories together that would have been told from generation to generation. The Odyssey was actually the second of two epic poems that Homer wrote. The first one is the Iliad. That's what the background is that we need to go over before you can be prepared to read the Odyssey. The Odyssey will be focusing on Odysseus and his journey home from the Trojan War, the subject of his first epic poem, the Iliad. The Iliad gives us the story of ancient Greece going to war with Troy, an area on the coast of now what we call Turkey. These two countries were fighting over a girl. You heard it right. The fate of the ancient world was decided because of a very beautiful girl leaving her very rich and powerful husband. It's important to understand that in ancient Greece, a lot of the mythology involved the gods playing tricks on humans. In this case, Paris, a prince of Troy, was approached by the gods. He was given a golden apple on which it said, "To the fairest." He then had to decide which of the three Greek goddesses should get the apple. He was approached by Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Hera, the goddess of leadership and the home, told him that she could help him be the greatest leader out in the world. Athena, the goddess of war, promised to help him win every victory he ever went to war with. And finally, Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, promised him the hand of the most beautiful woman in the world. I'll give you one guess what he chose. That's right. Paris chose the most beautiful woman in the world and gave the apple to Aphrodite. Because of this, when he went to visit Sparta and visit King Menelaus, he fell madly in love with his wife Helen. At that point, Paris and Helen escaped back to Troy, and that sparked the greatest war of ancient Greece. After Helen ran away with Paris to Troy, those kings of Greece all banded together and decided to cross the Mediterranean to fight Troy to win back Helen. And while you might think, why did Helen run away if they loved her so much? It wasn't so much about loving Helen as it was about maintaining their pride. The Greeks thought that they were the greatest civilization in the world, and the fact that one of their queens could be stolen away was a huge hit to their pride. That's why every king came together, even, yes, our hero Odysseus, to go and fight the Trojan War. As you look at this map, you're going to gain an understanding of how many different kingdoms there were in Greece at the time. The island nation of Ithaca is where Odysseus, our main character in the Odyssey, was king. But you'll see that he joined up with members from Pylos, Sparta, Athens, all different areas of Greece to go and fight the one city of Troy. But before he went, Odysseus had a trick up his sleeve. He knew he did not want to go and fight this war. He knew that it would mean being gone for many years and possibly his death. So, being the very intelligent man that he is, Odysseus pretended to be insane to try and get out of going to war. Much like dodging the draft in American history, he thought that by acting crazy, he wouldn't have to go and leave his family. Instead, when one of the other kings came to summon him, they tested Odysseus. Odysseus had been out in the field aimlessly plowing, letting his horses go wherever, again, to try and make it look like he was crazy. The other king took his newborn son, Telemachus, and laid him in the path of the plow. Obviously, Odysseus was not going to put his only son to death, and so he stopped the plow, proving his sanity, and knew that he had to leave for Troy. The Trojan War, as written in the Iliad, lasts for 10 years. The Greeks constantly trying to break down the walls of Troy, the Trojans withstanding every offense. And by the end of the 10 years, Odysseus knew that he had to come up with a different tactic to try and break down the walls of the Trojans. Rather than go by force, he wanted to use his wits. And what he did was come up with an idea of leaving a large wooden horse, appearing to be a sacrifice to the god Poseidon for their trip home. This would make it look like the Greeks had given up and run back to Greece. Instead, what the soldiers would do would be to hide in the horse. The Trojans, thinking that they were victorious, brought the horse inside the city, partied all day and all night, and while they slept, the Greeks snuck out and sacked Troy, burning it to the ground, and finally winning the 10-year-long Trojan War. One thing you have to know about Odysseus, he is a very proud man. We sometimes think of this as a positive, but it can be a negative. For example, when preparing to leave Troy to go home, Odysseus actually insults the sea god Poseidon, not giving him the proper sacrifice, saying that he could beat him no matter what because he took down the walls of Troy. Now, the last thing you need to do before you have to sail across an entire ocean is upset the god of the sea. And this leads to the Odyssey. Odysseus ends up having a 10-year journey home. So let's do the math. 10 years at war, 10 years on the sea means that Odysseus will have been away from his home for 20 years. During the time that he was gone, his wife Penelope and son Telemachus stayed home to rule Ithaca. Penelope is almost as clever as her husband, and she's incredibly loyal, promising to stay loyal to him until he returns home. Telemachus is just now becoming a man, and he was a baby immediately before Odysseus left. These two have had to struggle against all of the suitors or men trying to come and take Odysseus' kingdom. They weren't trying to steal it necessarily, they were trying to convince Penelope to remarry, but she knew that Odysseus was still alive and did not want to remarry. But while she waited and waited and waited, the suitors continued to take and take and take from her kingdom and from Ithaca. This will be an important theme in the book known as Xenia. This is the concept of hospitality in ancient Greece. In this world, when a stranger came to your home, you took care of them. But on the same token, as a stranger, you were to be kind and gracious to your host. In the book The Odyssey, there will be two storylines. There will be the one of Odysseus fighting to get home through the ocean, fighting monsters, people, Cyclops. The other storyline is about Penelope trying to remain loyal to her husband, as well as Telemachus trying to find the truth about his father. Both of these storylines end up coming together in the last few parts of the book. But what you'll notice about Penelope and Telemachus is they always talk about loyalty and being good to their guests, even when their guests are not so good to them. Throughout the Odyssey, there will be a couple gods and goddesses that play very major roles. We will have Zeus making some decisions at the beginning of the story, but he doesn't really pick one side or the other. The thing I want you to pay attention to is Athena will be the patron goddess of Odysseus. She's the goddess of warfare, but also above intelligence, and Odysseus is known for his cunning and wit. We will also see a lot of Poseidon, the god who will be against Odysseus on his journey home, for a couple reasons. We heard about Odysseus not paying him tribute before leaving after the war. You're also going to see Odysseus shoves a burning stick in Poseidon's son's eye. So he's got a couple reasons to be mad at Odysseus. We'll also see a little bit from the messenger god Hermes, but other than that, most of the gods will be out of the picture. As we move into the poem, you're really going to see that Odysseus is not a straightforward hero in the fact that he always does things right. He does many things wrong, mostly because of his pride. But in the end, his cunning, his bravery, and his loyalty will help him to be successful and to eventually return home after a long 20 years. In your next video, you will be given a summary of books 1 through 4. This is a lot of the story about what's going on back home in Ithaca near the end of our journey. And then, when you will begin reading, you will get to hear from Odysseus himself as he relays all of the different places he went throughout his journey home from Troy.